Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, July 29th, 2025, and today we are talking about when to scrap a crop, which crops are actually the most profitable, and cabbage root maggots. So let's do it. All right, everyone, lovely Tuesday to you all. I hope everyone is off to a good start this week. It is still just hotter than all get out here, as it has been for most of the eastern U.S. this week. So I don't have a lot to report on beyond doing some generic garden tasks and sweating a lot. But I am starting to turn my attention to the fall season more and more, both because, well, it's definitely that time of year, but also because it comes whether you're ready or not. So you kind of got to start paying attention to it. The seasons are tricky and unsympathetic like that. The amount of sunlight per day is about to noticeably dive here, and crops will slow down wildly. So although it could be incredibly warm all the way through September, stuff just won't grow as fast. The heat helps, obviously, but it's not the warmth, but the photons that plants are using to help break water molecules apart in photosynthesis. And the photons are not as numerous in the fall. So you may think we call it fall because of the leaves that fall from the trees, but it's actually called the fall because of the way that the sunlight dives or falls. Okay, that's not even remotely true. It's about the leaves, but a nerd can dream. Anyway, as I said yesterday, I'm trying to get caught up on Patreon questions, so we are not more than a month behind on them. I got to say, it is very cool that we get so much support from our Patreon members and get so many great questions. So please make sure to keep adding them to the show thread over there. This one is another really good one that comes to us from Patreon member Holly Cox, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I just want to know how you decide whether to cut your losses or keep nurturing a crop that has suffered serious pest damage or other major setbacks. I had a big potato beetle problem a few years ago, but despite losing a lot of foliage, was able to harvest a decent crop. On the other hand, a groundhog just ate 50% of my broccoli foliage. So I think it's too stressed to form a crown. Any tips on choosing to pull a crop and plant something else versus nursing it back to health?" End quote. All right, this is a great and very nuanced question here, Holly. And it is also one of the more confounding challenges in running a farm business. If a crop is not going to yield what I need it to yield, at what point is it better to just scrap that crop and then try something else? Well, there are a couple different things to think about here. And there's no perfect one, right answer. I'm sure maybe somebody has come up with a formula, but every crop is a little different. First, I think knowing what you need to make or harvest for a home garden from a crop will, in general, make this a little bit more straightforward. The potato example is a unique one because generally by the time a potato beetle starts in on a crop, it has already created some amount of potatoes. So in the worst case scenario, you get some new potatoes as you kind of described that you could potentially sell at an elevated price just to kind of make up some of that loss. The broccoli one is a little trickier. One factor is how long the broccoli has been in the ground. If you feel like it's not going to get a crown, I would probably just eliminate it. But if it's close to maturity and you do feel like it's gonna flower and turn into a head, then it may be worth keeping it because it is such a long season crop as to you don't want to waste all that. If it is a relatively recent planting or it is decimated beyond repair, like you kind of described, where you are unsure if it's going to yield much, if anything, and you do not feel like you can nurse it to health and protect it from, the various critters, then it is likely worth planting something else. There is no perfect formula to me because it depends on the days to maturity and profitability of a crop and what you need it for and how much that crop needs to earn you or how much you are depending on that crop for your kitchen needs for home gardeners. So that brings us to the second and arguably more important point. You need to make sure to solve the problem for the next crop or the subsequent time you grow that particular crop. The same thing will likely happen. Like the groundhog, how are you dealing with that or how are you going to deal with that before it puts you back into the same position again later? The reality behind gardening on a small scale is that you have to figure out how to make sure everything you plant succeeds as much as possible. Farming and gardening can be overwhelming and you need to get a bunch of things in at once. Not everything gets the attention it needs. But you learn pretty quickly how expensive it can get to set any plant into motion without guaranteeing its success as much as possible. Now, am I perfect at this? No. But especially when this farm was running at full tilt, I couldn't just hope the carrots germinated. They had to germinate. I couldn't just hope the lettuce succeeded. It had to succeed, or we couldn't pay our bills or our employee or ourselves. If I was going to plant anything, I had to be absolutely as certain as I could be that vegetable was going to make it to fruition, which I'm just now realizing has the word fruit right in there, which is kind of poignant. Fruition, which seems like a completely unnecessary sidebar. But anyway, empty space, failed plants, these are extremely costly in a market garden. No doubt, sometimes it's a bit out of your hands. And honestly, this is why you see so many growers are going more and more to growing under plastic or protected culture, because you can control so many more of the variables when you're under a high tunnel. But you do want to control as many of the variables as you can, given your context, so that you are not having to do this sort of calculus. Is that helpful at all? I hope so. Definitely took me a long time to appreciate that fact myself, that there is no perfect one right way to decide whether or not a crop is not working for you. I just think working backwards from what you need from it and then deciding if it is going to get anywhere near that is a good place to start. And then, of course, trying to make sure in the future that doesn't happen. Anyway, great question. And we're going to take a quick break. When we return, are tomatoes actually profitable? Oh boy, BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Richard Schuler, who writes, quote, "It seems to be a very popular opinion that most profitable crops for market farmers are things like lettuce heads, radishes, carrots, beets, lettuce mix, Hakurei turnips, field tomatoes, and perhaps most importantly, greenhouse tomatoes. I watch a lot of farm videos, and the basis for these crops and their profitability is based on their annual amount of revenue they bring in. Nowhere is the cost of production mentioned. My tomatoes not only require a lot of infrastructure in the form of a hoop house and trellising equipment, but also bi-monthly applications of fertilizer, as well as weekly trimming and moving of the clips. They had to be grafted, started indoors, moved to a transition greenhouse, and cared for since February. It's mid-June, and I haven't sold a tomato yet. However, my basil produces $5 per week for every 2 plants I have, and every time I touch them, it is only to harvest. They require no washing and are light to transport. This is a glaring example, but there are many others. Okra can take any type of abuse and only needs to be attended to when you harvest. Mini cabbage is on no one's profitability list, but it takes only 5 days longer than head lettuce. It requires no washing and could even be sold for 2 weeks. Some of the short season crops that are supposed to be profitable certainly are, but why not longer season crops like winter squash? I only touch them twice, planting and harvest. Broccoli and cauliflower are the same. Profit equals revenue minus cost. What gives?" End quote. I love this question, Richard. This is one that I'm surprised hasn't come up earlier. There's a lot here, so I will try and break it up into a couple different topics. Basically, determining if a crop is profitable, and tomatoes are not as profitable as people think. Okay, so let's start with the tomato thing, because that's relatively easy. There is a growing consensus among farmers that tomatoes are not as profitable as they may seem based on the cost they demand at market, for the reasons that you laid out: time and labor and fertility, etc. I remember going to a talk, in fact, maybe a couple years ago, by Liz Grasnek of Happy Hollow Farm at the Oak Conference. And the talk was called "Are Tomatoes Worth It? Evaluating Profitability in High Tunnels Crop by Crop." And in fact, I didn't realize this when I started on the segment, but the whole talk is online, and I will link it in the show notes because it's great and Liz is awesome, especially when it comes to farm business stuff. So anyway, the way that Liz kind of recommends going about understanding if a crop is profitable, and in particular tomatoes, is she takes the total square footage that crop takes up times the net price you will get for that crop divided by the number of weeks that crop will be in the ground. And that will give you the price you will make per week that crop is in the ground. Again, that is the total square footage that crop takes up times the net price you will get for that crop divided by the number of weeks that crop will be in the ground. Now, you might see something like heirloom tomatoes that can make $5 or more a pound as a more really high profit crop. But once you start subtracting all of the costs like grafts and fertilizer and all that stuff, getting closer to your net price, and you can factor in the 6 or 10 weeks or whatever it takes for that to get to production in the ground without producing anything, then you realize tomatoes do not make nearly as much money as, say, basil, to use your example. or lettuce, or a lot of other crops. In fact, I think Liz's formula is a really great way to determine the profitability of any crop. And she kind of, in that video, lays out exactly how to do that. The other way to do it, the other way to kind of determine, the profitability of a crop or the profitability of a bed is what we've kind of always done, which is more or less charge rent to our crops. Basically, we figure out what all of our costs for all of our crops are going to be for the season and divide that by the number of beds we have. So if the season is going to cost, well, I don't know, arbitrarily like $50,000 in seed and compost and seasonal employee labor, etc., plus you want to earn like $50,000 for yourself, take home pay for the work you do, and you have, let's say, 100 beds total, that is $100,000 divided by 100 beds, conveniently, which means each bed must earn you a minimum of $1,000 per year. Does that make sense? So if each bed is going to pay its rent and the rent is $100,000, that's $1,000 per bed. That can mean that every bed has to earn that on average, like you could spread it out a little bit, but it really should be every bed has to earn that, period. Each bed has to pay its rent. So if you want to grow longer season crop that does not fetch much at market, such as potatoes, which may arbitrarily not make you more than, I don't know, like $400 per bed per crop, depending on how long and wide your beds are, then you need to follow it with a crop that will earn you that other $600 or you will come up under budget. Now, sure, your high tunnels will pay significantly more in rent than your other beds, which gives you some room to play with in the field to try new crops or just grow some more caloric crops like potatoes or sweet potatoes or popcorn or whatever. I don't know if popcorn's particularly caloric, but it's delicious. Anyway, those sorts of slower season crops like winter squash that you mentioned that you just kind of want to grow or that don't take you a lot of work, it can be a little bit of a slippery slope though. So we still try to make sure every bed meets its rent, and then the high tunnel was just an overachiever. So if you wanted to grow, say, winter squash using this sort of calculus, that's fine, but what are you going to put there before or afterwards that helps cover the costs? Or during, right? You could do interplants, not necessarily with winter squash, but with other crops, or maybe in the case of a milpa with winter squash. I just don't know 100% that would make up your, $600 loss per bed. Anyway, perhaps a method more like Liz's where you are just looking at each individual crop and asking, hey crop, do you make enough money? I think that's going to make more sense in certain contexts. I do recommend watching that whole talk that Liz gave, though. And again, I'll link that in the show notes because you will find that tomatoes are not super high up there on the profitability list, at least according to Liz's calculations. That will, of course, depend on your markets, too, and your production methods. If you can charge $8 per pound versus $4 per pound for an heirloom tomato, well, the calculus definitely changes in that scenario because your net price will go up considerably. I also think this sort of math is just generally important because if you are wanting to earn, say, $100,000 a year take home, you start to see how difficult something like that is on, 50 or even 100 beds, especially because your costs go up with more volume and more help. You also begin to see that certain crops like tomatoes don't earn what they seem like they earn because once you subtract all those costs, it's not a lot of money left over. In fact, you may see that a lot of farmers are trying to find less intensive ways to grow tomatoes, some even not pruning them or stopping pruning them in their tunnels and getting what they get. The labor, pruning, and trellising really just starts to add up. Basil and other herbs can be highly profitable if you can move them, like sell them. Lettuce and short season cabbages like Napa are really great for the amount of revenue they bring in compared to the amount of time they are in the ground and amount of space that they take up. Radishes are a no-brainer at 30 days to maturity, as long as you can sell them. I find that we sell radishes really well, really early, and then there's a break because everybody has radishes, and then coming back in the summer, you can sell a lot of radishes again. Turnips are a little less so on the profitability range only because they take a little bit longer to mature and are harder to sell. Like, I don't know, we don't have a huge Hakurai turnip market here. Anyway, great question here, Richard. There is a lot to cover on farm profitability and individual crops, but I'll leave it to the comments section to guide this particular conversation for Feedback Friday. Otherwise, let's take a quick break, and when we return, we will talk cabbage root maggots, those jerks. Be right back. So I'm harvesting some lettuce, and I see this group of ants gathered around this caterpillar, and I shouldn't have picked this up because it would have been cool to show you, but this, basically, it looks like these ants killed like I don't know, some sort of lettuce caterpillar. These guys. That's amazing. Go ants. Also, stay out of my cereal boxes. All right, our final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Christine Bell, who asks, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I'll start off by saying that I don't think I've missed a single episode for several years. Your YouTube videos are both educational and entertaining, and by far one of my favorites to watch." Oh, thank you. That's awesome. My problem / question is I've recently moved to a new property and I'm experiencing root maggots in my brassicas. The plants are large and lovely and within a few days are wilted, and when I pull them up are covered with the white monsters. What causes them and what can I do to prevent the problem from continuing? A little context, my previous farm was 5 years no-till, but this current farm is in its first year, so I'm working on bringing in the beneficials, but I'm not quite sure, aside from maybe ground beetles, what I'm needing to combat the little creatures. Thank you very much for your time and dedication to this channel, and keep up the amazing work, end quote. Okay, great stuff here, Christine. Thank you so much, and thank you for the kind words. That's really appreciated. And I want to be transparent about this. Because cabbage root maggot is not a pest that we've kind of personally dealt with here, everything that I'm going to say comes from what I can find in the research. So hopefully there is something helpful for you in what I could find. First, cabbage maggots is one of the areas where crop rotation can come in really clutch. What I mean is that the fly that lays the eggs that results in root maggots overwinters on debris and in the soil. So if you plant a brassica in the same place next season, well, the root maggots will be excited about that. It is also recommended to remove the crop entirely, roots and all, at the end of the season to avoid overwintering the pupae. Rotating the susceptible crops away from those areas will be essential, but it is also recommended that you plant those brassica crops a little later to skip the primary season of the cabbage maggots. Indeed, research suggests that plants are most vulnerable to infection from 2 weeks on, like after emergence when direct seeding. So once they kind of break through the cotyledons and start to get some more mature leaves. Next, exclusion netting, insect netting, or early on in the season, you could use something like row cover before it gets too hot. And you don't want that when it's getting too hot outside, because it'll melt your plants. That sort of stuff will help to keep the flies from having access to your young plants, which, like I said, it seems that they prefer brassicas after they have begun to mature and with like 5 or 6 true leaves. Of course, if you planted a brassica in that same area the year before, then insect netting will only trap them inside and you will worsen the problem. So again, rotate. And the biggest thing always with pests is simply that the soil quality will always help tremendously. So that should change as you grow into this new garden space. And as you keep working on it, the soil will eventually do a lot of the defending for you, as will that work you do on the beneficials you mentioned. Bring in as many flowers as you can. Mulch helps, all those things. This is definitely one of those examples where when people talk about not rotating crops, I get a little nervous, because even if you did not have a terrible or noticeable incidence of cabbage maggots, for instance, the year before, the next year you could end up being overrun. So yeah, don't get cocky, friends. Just rotate them crops. All right, we're going to call it a Tuesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. An enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Tell her I said hi. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Blue sky come. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of July, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Sharon. Oh, did we land another Sharon? Nice. And Brenton Walters. All right, story time. Let's go. So this week's story is about a family who they moved to like a small town in Pennsylvania. Sure. And they start to garden with really only one goal in mind: pizza farm. Now, obviously no one grows pizza, at least not yet, though obviously that would make this a little bit easier. But rather, they want to start a farm that grows the peppers and the onions and the mushrooms and the tomatoes and the herbs and the spices, all the wheat that they need for the dough, even raise the cattle for the cheese. It's a huge, ambitious idea. Then they would build like a small wood-fired pizza stand on the side of, like in front of their house, and just sell pizza freshly fired at the farmer's market as well, and then out of the roadside stand every week. So it's a whole ambitious thing, and they had it all mapped out. But then after 2 years of getting the farm up and running and getting all the infrastructure in place, including an impressive like brick pizza oven thing, plus they put their sign out on the road, and a lovely like wooden sign with the words "Pizza Farm" boldly etched on it, and like a little pizza growing out of the ground. You'd love it. Anyway, after all that work, something happens. The new neighbors, they'd noticed, and they kind of chatted with a little bit. Some new neighbors bought the farm across the street, and they just moved in let's say 6 months earlier. And almost the exact same time that Pizza Farm puts their sign out, clear as day, the neighbors put a sign out right across the street that says Burger Farm. and the battle begins. That is for tomorrow on the Food Farmers, or Food Fight. The Food Fight of the Food... Nope. Well, you can just pick one. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.